Welcome to Brooklands Members TV and Podcasts. I'm Steve Clark and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by the freelance writer and event director Peter Higham and the former McLaren chief mechanic Neil Trundle. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello,
great to have you both with us this evening, and it's great that we've got people online looking forward to our conversation. You, the audience, will be given an opportunity to ask some questions during the evening by typing into the chat box, which I'll try and pick up, but I can't promise I'll be able to give them all airing. And tonight at the end, if you wish to ask a question online. So tonight's topic is Peter's new book, Formula One Car by Car 1990 to 1999, published by Evro at a very reasonable price of £45. Now, I don't intend to plough through every race, every car through the decade. I think we'd be here till breakfast. So we're just three guys sitting in the pub talking about Formula One in the 1990s with around 50 or so people listening in. So, Peter, just remind us that you're no stranger to the world of Formula One, having written about decades from the 1950s and now up to the 90s. How did it all start?
Well, I worked for Autosport from a very early age. When I left college, I went to work for Autosport, worked on the commercial side there for a number of years, and left to become a freelance writer. And I've been, for the last 5 years, writing this series of decade by decade books about the teams and cars and people of Formula One. So this is the fifth volume, which covers the 1990s, as you said, which is, an amazing era.
I've read the book and enjoyed not only your dialogue with it, but the actual amount of data that's in there. But also, I think I realised looking back now how much technological change there was during that time. Some controversy, which no doubt we'll talk about. There was a lot of things that happened, and clearly coupled with that, quite a sad time in 1994 with the loss of Roland, Ratzenberger and Ayrton, Senna. So, not an all rosy picture all around. So, Peter, let's start with your view of the decade, an age that gave us, I believe, 7 world champions and 4 constructors' titles.
It was an exceptional decade, and 1994 was a pivotal year in Formula One history, without a doubt. But you look at the beginning of the decade, you had 35 cars trying to, entering the first races of 1990. So there was pre-qualifying and all of that, and you ended it with a very regimented Formula One with a set number of teams that had to race at every race. But a very professional sport. As I said, 1994 was a pivotal year in safety and various other things. But it was a decade of heroes, I would say. Was so strong.
Yeah, indeed. Neil Trundle, just to bring you in, your overview of the decade as well, from someone that was actually in the thick of it. I know most of the time back in the Woking workshop, but having worked through the 1980s, which obviously led into crazy statements said into the 90s, but a lot of things went on that influenced racing in the 90s.
Yes, well, first of all, just to say how good it is to get together after all this lockdown, and that Brooklands is finally open again, I believe, yeah?
We're partially open now, and the sheds are open. A few of the kind of interactive stuff is still on hold, but yeah, it's back open for business, which is great news.
Great, and summer seems to be arriving.
Well, hopefully from tomorrow, apparently.
So before we start talking about the 90s, can I just say that I've tried to catch up on the book. This is an amazing book, so much detail. This was a very special era, these 1990 to 1999, But so I opened the book when Steve brought it around 2 weeks ago, and I'd say it would take me years to read it cover to cover.
That's
it was such a comprehensive period of so many cars. But what I like about the book is each year, I like the intro, the 1 or 2, the 2-page intro summing up the season, and then car by car. So I've been studying those, and I've been doing all my notes year by year and picking out the salient points. But it was a special era. So I came off the team end of 89. I was Gearbox manager for 16 years after that. But so I'm good on the Gearbox stuff. I can't believe how many regulation changes and the technology during this period that swung backwards and forwards.
It was an exceptional era for technology up to 93, 94 when the FIA tried to.
Right.
But
unbelievable changes, switching backwards and forwards in regs. And actually, while we're on that subject, we've lost Max. Love him or hate him, you know, Max brought something to the sport, and Max was very much involved in all these regulation changes, which were vast, to try and slow cars down, bring about safety. So I say hats off to you for picking. You're brave to take that era of so much change. And can I ask you what your sources were for all the data each year? Incredible detail.
I try and go back to the contemporary reports but you know, contemporary magazines and newspapers and so on. And obviously there are a lot of very good books about the technology of Formula One, and that is one of the sources. But I really try and go back to what was being said at the time, and I love all the politics and the personnel changes as well. And you know, when a designer moves. You know, John Barnard's next Ferrari is going to be the one. John Alesi wants to be there. I love just reading that as it was being said at the time, rather than a report later. So, a lot of fun going back. I like living in the past. So it's,
In fact, from that period of all the technological development, now it's more or less settled down, and it will change with the new engine regs. But this was a period of trying to control the development and technology, and also trying to bring about safety and reduce speed. And it was just crazy, wasn't it?
I think the Williams FW14B sort of sums up just the crazy imagination of those engineers back then, and just the ultimate in technological car. It would have been superseded, but obviously the regulations changed, and
yes,
FIA definitely wanted to get rid of electronic driver aids, as they were said at the time. But, it was an amazing time. But you were working at McLaren, I know, in Woking. But when when Senna died, which must have been very personal to you guys, and obviously the shock of Roland Ratzenberger and all the other accidents happening at the time, and the FIA and Max Mosley were pushing through changes, you know, at a rate of knots. The team's not liking it, as far as I could see. What happened in the corridors of Woking at that time? Because it must have been, you know, we're going to have to step flat bottoms and all of this just being imposed on you guys in 2 months, you know.
Well, this was a period when technology outflanked driver ability. You know, this is the argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the performance, what percentage is in the cars and what's in the drivers. But it certainly brought about problems and trying to keep up with the regs. Yeah. And also people, and I don't know how we could go through briefly year by year, but you know, engineers were trying to find loopholes, and certainly people were certainly stretching the regulations, and there were lots of protests and FIA inquiries And it was a tricky period for designers and the FIA. You know, the FIA were trying to control it and slow it down, and the engineers were trying to find the loopholes. And we can talk about some of those. You know, shall we pick year by year, just briefly, year by year, and it's going to test me and you, but
yeah.
So
Neil, I'm happy for you to take the lead and go through year by year. I mean, there's obviously some highlights that you'd like to bring out, and I don't mind it being a McLaren led evening.
No, it won't be, because I mean, 10 years, that's a big period to cover in the book. How long did it take you to write the book, Peter?
I reckon they take about a year to do one of these books.
Really?
You know, I do other stuff as well, obviously, but it takes about a year to research, write it, and then do the production with the guys from Evro, who I think have done a cracking job again.
And how many hours a day? A set period each day?
No, I sort of space it out, but it gets pretty intense towards the end.
Well, the reason I asked that, because I started doing my book about 6 months ago. And unless you set the time aside and the research, and so I'm starting to realise it's quite a task. And now this is your fourth or fifth book.
This is the fifth in this book. Yeah.
And can I ask you, the earlier decades were easier, weren't they? The DFV engines and that period, that was a lot easier.
They all present a different challenge. I mean, in the 1950s, the big challenge was finding a photograph of every driver in every car, because people didn't send photographers to the Argentinian Grand Prix in 1953. You know, if you look at motorsport, maybe not in 1953, maybe there are pictures in that one, but you would just have a single page in motorsport of text. There were no pictures. So to try and find some funny, you know, local in a Maserati that never raced anywhere else ever again, was a challenge. But Mark Hughes at Evro succeeded, so that was good anyway. So they had their challenges.
And I saw that you were involved with LAT once in the past.
I worked there for 17 years, which, you know, was...
So you were able to call on a few favours for your photos, and
they are the main source.
Great shots in the book.
Yeah.
So great. The book. So when did the book come out? It's only just been launched, or it hasn't?
I think it's about a month ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's recent.
And it's so available. What you mainly online or
Amazon or through Evro. Direct, so normal retailers and you know, chasers and people like that. So yeah.
So tonight's a good opportunity for the people of Brooklands to ask questions and share some thoughts on your book, and for you, it's a good opportunity to advertise your book. But it's great.
Yeah. You're much better selling than I am, Neil.
But come on now. It's great for, I mean, I support Brooklands, and it's been a period of, well, for the whole world, strange period, and we're coming out of it. So this is a good opportunity to say to the people of Brooklands, keep supporting the club and Brooklands, and here we are doing our best, aren't we, to bring some interest to it.
Really opportune moment, because I always used to go to Brooklands on the day of the Indy 500. Because of, you know, I just love the Indy 500 and love oval racing, as well as Formula One, obviously. And so I'd always go there. I'd take my young boy and go, look at that banking, you know, that is serious. So at it, Indy 500 weekend coming up. And
I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine, Gavin Beresford, and his brother Nigel Beresford was very involved in Indy. And we were talking about car safety and the halo, and he, because of his brother, really is following Indy now, and of course it's coming up for the 500.
Yeah.
And we're talking about all the halo, or their interpretation of the halo, and he said that lives have been saved already with that. They do look like a bit of a sports car, but the halo has certainly brought about some safety.
Well, I any skeptic about the Halo watching Roman Grosjean's crash, must be.
Wasn't that a way? That was such an impact of making us realise that the thing was effective. Of all the skeptics of it, I mean, it's a bit like that Hans device, all the devices.
Yeah,
boy, that and when we reflect on that, how he ever got out of that, and incidentally, and he went to Indy. He's at Indy now, and they had a race. There he is, an F1 driver going to Indy, and I think he led. I can't remember the race. It was a few weeks ago, and he led the race in a second.
He qualified on pole for the road course. He's not doing.
How good is that?
Really
step out of that, to step out of that inferno,
Going back to the 90s, and Max Mosley, who obviously is recent in our thoughts. Post at Imola '94, through the safety. It was almost the time where Formula One really stepped up the game for safety. And it was resisted by teams because it was cost and it was brought in really quickly. But Formula One did get safer from that. Yeah. It was a terrible. Yeah. I remember the weekend really well. And the period really well, but Formula One now does drive through safety, which is great.
Yes, I agree. So just taking a few years. So 1990, Senna was champion.
Yeah. In controversial circumstances.
Yeah. Well, shall we talk about that in a second? So he was in the 5B, and it had a V10 engine. And there was Prost with the Ferrari with a V12 engine, which was performing very well.
Yeah, probably the best Ferrari for the first half of that decade. It's the only time it challenged Ferrari. Yeah. Ferrari always seemed to say next year is going to be a transition year, and we'll challenge the year after.
Right.
Until the revolution of Todd, Brawn.
Right.
They always just putting it off. But that year they had a real go at it, didn't they?
Yeah, but they did have Prost in the car, who was very special.
He was a pretty good driver, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I also noted 35 entries pre-qualifying in that period.
I know. I love writing about the minnows and working out all of that. And one became sort of sanitized over this period.
Sure.
Of regular fields.
Yeah.
And teams like Andrea Moda disappearing, and live race engines. What a crazy idea that was.
Onyx, David Purley.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many small teams.
Yeah, but
and lots of different engines. So many different engines in that period.
Yeah, no, it was special for that.
But talking about safety, 1990 was the Lotus with a Lamborghini. With Donnelly.
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot about that chassis. Colin Chapman, or they always said they did the first carbon chassis. McLaren's always said they did the first carbon chassis. The carbon chassis of Donnelly was a composite chassis, but it was glued and bolted together. It wasn't homogeneous in one layer, and that car fell apart. And thanks to safety and Sid Watkins, God rest his soul, he was saved, but that was a wake-up call on chassis stiffness.
It was a horrific accident, and you will know better than me, but I think it sort of affected Ayrton Senna, didn't it? Because he came on Martin Donnelly in the middle of the road.
That's right.
Accident and stopped, and that must have an effect on a driver.
Sure. I mean, lots of drivers have come across accidents like that, and it's whether they can switch off from it. But drivers say that's what started to bring about stiffer chassis and more safety. And Sid Watkins, bless him, he was such a driving force for safety. Magic guy. I met him many, many times. In fact, I've still got his watch somewhere tucked away. But he saved he saved a few people and he pushed safety. But and I've also got at the bottom of my notes here that it was I think the last year of Lotus, or they were on the way out. Brabham were going as well. Teams were dropping out. Teams with established names.
Well, Lotus got into real trouble at that time and were rescued by Peter Wright and Peter Collins with Hakkinen as the driver. And for 2 years, because I have to declare I'm a bit of a Lotus fan, for 2 years, with Hakkinen and Herbert in the car, it was the good news story. They seemed to be on the way back. But by 1984, the cards were against them and they went out, which is really sad. Brabham.
And ironically, they had Loctite sponsorship.
Yeah.
And when they folded and Ekrim Sami came back to McLaren, he brought Loctite to us. So
was he at Lotus at that time then?
Ekrim was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. He tried to do the IndyCar program for Lotus.
Right. Okay.
Ekrim did. So just finalised in 1990 the Japan race. I think Ayrton was correct in saying he should have been given the choice of pole position, the side of the road for pole.
Yeah. I would agree.
And he'd said his mind that if he didn't make it off the start first, that they weren't going to be able to both get through that corner together.
It was a deliberate act, wasn't it?
Did he ever admit that? But it was obvious, wasn't it?
I think he always said that there was a gap and he went for an overtaking manoeuvre, but I don't think he did. But then, go back 12 months and Suzuka in 89.
Yeah. Yes.
Prost and Senna crashed into each other.
Right.
And I've always thought that Prost moved over, not in such a deliberate act. Whether Ayrton would have made the corner is another argument. But you were chief mechanic at the time.
So. I was watching the screen, standing in the pits. And
Tell me what it was like.
I said, this is going to end in tears. So did Ayrton get a push? You know what? They penalised the Ayrton for going through the chicane, but that was the wrong penalty because you were allowed to go through the chicane. He should have been penalised for a push start. But anyway, that's history. That's history. Yeah. So that was 1990. 1991, Senna champion.
With Gerhard Berger as teammate, what was the atmosphere like? Obviously, those 2 years. What was the atmosphere like after Prost Senna, between Senna and Berger?
Oh, they were best of pals.
Yeah.
They socialised, they partied, they played pranks on each other the whole year, some of which you couldn't believe. Throwing someone's briefcase out the helicopter in mid-flight. Things like they were bizarre. And Ron Dennis was involved in that as well. But the mistake we made, talking about my team, or Honda made, was because Prost's V12 was so good, Honda decided to do a V12.
Yeah.
And it was so heavy that it wasn't competitive, really. So in 91, they did a 60-degree V12, and in 92, they did a 75-degree V12. The thing was used so much fuel and was so heavy, whereas the little Ferrari V12 was a beautiful little engine. Yeah. So I've got here technical innovation. So 1990, Ferrari with Barnard, and that was when Barnard started to get involved or was signed up to them.
Yeah.
Now, I think John got the credit for the semi-auto gearboxes, the paddle shift gearbox rather. But actually, when he went to Ferrari, they'd already tried to do it. And so that was the start of a technology that I got involved in. And the Ferrari system was a solenoid or a hydraulic on each rail, and they had to try and make sure that it selected the right rail each time.
Okay.
And often it got both together and massive blow-ups. But they did start that technology of paddle shift gear changing, and that was a clear advantage. Arguably, should it be in racing, should the driver have the skill of the gear change? Because thereafter, the technology's raced away, if they'd have...
that famous in-car lap of Monaco of Ayrton Senna?
Yes.
He's doing gear changes.
Yes.
You know, well, any bit of in-car at that time, if you show that to somebody who watches Formula One now, they go, wow, you know,
Yeah.
do that.
You see, and that's another part of the equation of the skill of driving, which maybe should be there now, because you've got so many, well, they've taken away some devices that could have been there, you know, but that was the start of the paddle shift gearboxes. And
I'm still astounded by current racing drivers when they go, you know, P4, Strat 5, whatever it is, and you just think about how many different buttons and combinations they've got to remember and do while they're racing.
But you see people like Lando, they've come up with the computer age. They play on their games, and they can learn that very easily, and it's automatic, you know. But did you notice Coulthard interviewed Sainz at Monaco after the race, and he was just chatting to him, and he said, "You're not even sweating." He said, well, Sainz said, "Well, I'm very fit," but really what it is, you know, then they've got power steering and they're not having to work at it. You know, they're getting out fresh. Yeah. Whereas, you know, back in the day, they got out and they were just wasted, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So 91 was technology. I've got here active suspension. I've got here that Lotus were the first to do the active suspension with Senna in 87 and the Camel car.
Well, I believe Lotus patented the term active suspension. So when Williams had their system, it was initially called reactive.
Really? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just because of a patent.
Lotus made it work. They won Monaco and Detroit.
Detroit, with Senna, yeah.
So they started it, and it came on later. But
Williams took it to the ultimate.
Williams, and in '93 with McLaren the MP4-8, that was our version.
Yeah.
The little HB engine car with Senna. Last year with Senna.
How much did having a Ford engine after the years of Hondas sort of harm that championship challenge, you think?
Well, the mistake, to repeat, was that if Honda had stayed with the V10 and had latched on to Renault's magic technology, which we have to give them credit for, the pneumatic valves, they developed pneumatic valves, and instantly the rev limit went up from 12,000 to infinitesimal because valve bounce was no longer the restriction on the engine revs. So if Honda had stayed with the V10 and incorporated the pneumatic valves, we'd have been looking good. Yeah. We didn't put pneumatic valves on the V12 until '92. Renault had already got it developed, and their revs were 16,000.
By that time, Renault was the engine to have, wasn't it?
Oh, that was the major leap through.
Yeah.
That was, and I don't know, was it Boody or who was the guy at Renault who developed that system? But how brave was that?
Well, Dudo was leading the program, but I'm not sure the actual engineer who did that doesn't spring to mind. But
and the other thing in your book, you talk about Elf fuel, implying that they had magic fuel, you know, good fuel.
I think that one of the things that surprised me researching this is how important development of fuel was alongside the engine manufacturer.
Yes.
It was very, very, it was integral, really, wasn't it, to the technology was developed. Yeah. It was another thing that the FIA cracked down on.
Right. So on the automatic gearbox development, so Ferrari did it in 90 and struggled with it. 91, Williams got it right. They did the sequential barrel shift, but they didn't have a throttle blip. And I remember going to the races and the drivers on downshift had to blip and flip the pedal to get it to go right because they didn't have fly-by-wire throttle. 92, we put it on our car, and Honda did electric blip throttle, and that just solved the downshift problem.
Okay.
So it's funny how each team copies but improves it, and now just going on from that, now we have seamless shift.
Yeah.
Where there's no lift of power.
That is amazing, isn't it?
Which goes wrong now and again. So, yes, so 91, Burlesque was out. Max came in, proposed ban on cigarette advertising.
Rumbled on for the decade.
Yeah. And also, 91 was the first year that Senna won his home Grand Prix in Brazil.
Which is that the one when
Stuck in Gear?
In the Senna movie. The film of that is just amazing.
Yeah.
Because he's so emotional.
I was there as Gearbox support guy, and when he lost the gears, and he said, "I'm stuck in sixth gear," and I had to endure the last 10 laps with Patrese catching up. That was a bit. I think I started to smoke at that point.
When that came on the radio, did everyone look round at you?
They were looking around all the time. It was a time of Gearbox development, so I was always, when I watched the races at home, I was always on the edge of my seat when they talked about Gearbox problem. Prost was fired from Ferrari at the end of that year. And significantly, Leighton House got the first Ilmor Mercedes V10.
Yes. Well, it wasn't badged as a Mercedes at the time, but it was...
No, it was badged as Ilmor. Yeah, that's right.
Ilmor now is what Mercedes is, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and an amazing engineering company.
Yeah. 92, Mansell champion. Pump fuel was a regulation. The Renault V10, the most powerful I've got here.
Yeah. Well, it was the engine to have by then, and and I always think it's interesting looking at Benetton and Flavio Briatore just doing politics to try and get the Renault engine,
which he got,
which he got in the end. But buying teams because they had a Renault, I think McLaren actually put a bid in to buy Ligier at some point to try and get Renault engines. But Benetton won the World Championship in 1994 with a Ford engine.
Yes.
And still swapped to, still have this whole thing. We've got to have Renault engines,
Well, so they won in 94 with a Ford engine, but they had lots of systems in the car, which maybe shouldn't
have been there. Yes.
Should we talk about that? Let's touch on that. Because, so traction control, did they have it? Stewart said he thought they did have it because he could hear the car changing. And Ayrton, chasing down the first 3 races, were convinced they had traction control.
Well, I always thought that was a massive contributing factor to Imola.
Of course, yeah. And we had an engineer who shan't be named, who joined McLaren, and he didn't say as much, but he implied that at the end of the race, the computer re-zeroed itself and that information was lost. But, everyone's trying to look for loopholes. But what they did have, which wasn't sussed out for a while, was their launch trigger. So the FIA introduced a trigger on the grid, which sensed the car moving. And so when the lights went out, that trigger under the car activated.
Yeah.
So Benetton figured their launch control so that it acted on that trigger. So when the lights went out, it acted the launch control because he did make some good starts. But, he was the up-and-coming driver.
Michael Schumacher was, obviously now taking Formula One by storm, wasn't he?
Of course.
But it's called The Unfair Advantage, I believe.
Written by Mark Donoghue.
It was Mark Donoghue, yes. But there was loads of rumblings in 94 about that car. But I don't believe there's ever a protest.
No, you're probably right there.
Which just seems odd,
Shall we talk about 94, going on from that, and the competition between Schumacher and Ayrton? Ayrton had pole position for the first 4 races with a car that wasn't handling very well. And, ironically, Adrian would have sorted that car out.
I think by the end of the year, that car was the best car.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And yeah, he had pole for the first 3 races, and obviously spun in Brazil, was taken out at the start in the Pacific Grand Prix, and then obviously Imola is a very well-known story. But I agree with you. I think Senna would have won that championship, because by the end of the year it was.
Yeah. We'll never know, and also, again, we'll never know what the cause of Ayrton's accident was, and maybe it's better that we don't know. I said to Neil Oatley at McLaren, I said, I can't believe there wasn't someone in the crowd when he was coming through that corner that didn't have it filmed. And he said, there wasn't a crowd. There are no spectators.
Yeah, there's none
on the outside of that corner. And so we'll never know, will we?
No. And the one thing I was thinking about quite recently about that is that, Tamburello, there had been several big accidents in the previous years. Piquet, Berger, Albert, but all had big accidents there. And yet there's no change to the corner, because it's flat out, very narrow, as we saw this year with Bottas and Russell.
Well, it wasn't a change to the corner, but there was a change to the barrier, because when Berger had his accident, the barriers followed the curve. And Berger bounced along the barrier. They moved the barrier back, and it presented 90 degrees to Ayrton. Okay. Which, didn't help. But I mean, but it's just one of those things, isn't it? Steel suspension, no halo, low cockpits, safety's in fact, Formula One is probably one of the safest forms of racing at the moment, I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree. It's
in all racing,
great progress.
So, and also I've got it. Pirelli withdrew, and everyone was on Goodyear tyres at that period.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Tyre
Wars just drove the whole thing for qualifying tyres, which contributed to accidents. And tyre technology has been amazing in Formula One all the way through. And I think in a way, tyres are sort of they're not spoken about. When I used to go to Formula One races, and people would talk about tyre strategies and everything like that, and then you just walk through the paddock and there's a pile of tyres just sitting there. And I'm thinking that is one of the most important things in winning the race, and they're just sitting there. And I know that no one's going to tamper, but it's just weird. It's a very undervalued bit of sport, if you see what I mean.
Sure. And what do you think about
black and boring? Sorry?
What do you think about the current Pirelli need to run both tyres and run start the race with Q2 ones?
I like the whole thing that you've got to change tyres, and therefore the strategy comes and everything like that. I wish that the rubber didn't force people to conserve. I want to see racing drivers go flat out. Yeah. So when you hear they're in a conservation period of the race, you just think, oh, come on, build them to last.
Gentlemen, can I just interject? We have a question from the audience, from Anne Holden, who talks about technology outpaced driver ability. But she said, so far, you've not mentioned Nigel Mansell's famous for his ability to wring the neck out of any car. I'd appreciate a comment.
Well, one of the best bits of television from this era, and I'll lose the year, but is Mansell going round the outside of another car at the final corner in Mexico City, which was just one of the most amazing overtakes. And he he was an exceptional man for getting the most more than he should out of a car. You knew he just wore his heart on his sleeve, and he did more for motor racing in this country than most others in terms of putting bums on seats.
The unfortunate thing is his bum in our seat didn't fit.
Well, yes.
Anyway, moving on.
But one of the best passes as well with Mansell was on Piquet at British Grand Prix Silverstone when he went down the inside of him.
And yeah, it was like a double bluff, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, magic.
Yeah.
And it took him a few years to get in the groove. You know, when he came into Formula One, it took him a while, but suddenly he hit that spot.
That was partly because you know he came in with Lotus. Lotus were on the wane. Yes, they won Grand Prix again, but after his time there. But he moved to Williams and mid 80s, 85, I'm thinking, and was up against Rosberg and then Piquet. And I think both those two world champions underestimated the man because you know he worked really hard. He was very quick. Deserved his championship when he won it in '92.
Oh yeah, yes. I agree.
So let's go back on to '95, Neil, and then go on from there as we're on that era.
Yeah, '95, Schumacher champion, Benetton with a Renault engine. I mean, that was the combination. '95, ironically, we acquired the Ilmor engine, the Ilmor Mercedes engine. We stole it from Sauber. You talk about the Piranha Club and dog eat dog. That's the way it is, you know. Steal drivers, we steal engines. Yeah.
Sauber came into the sport, I think, in '93.
Yeah.
Backing from Mercedes, but officially with a Mercedes engine. And they had that. Then McLaren took that engine from them because you had an unhappy experience with Peugeot.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite ironic because that year in '94, McLaren, it's always seen as a disastrous year, but McLaren...
It wasn't. We scored good points.
Fourth in the championship and scored 8 podium finishes.
Right.
McLaren Honda in 2015, you know, they'd have been, you know.
Yeah, I love the Peugeot guys, and the engine. They wouldn't listen on one thing. They wouldn't do an oil air separator, and it tended to foam the oil. You remember Brundle on the grid, Silverstone, from the start.
That massive fire.
Yeah, but it was a good engine, and we had good results.
Yeah,
you know?
But sorry, with Sauber, obviously they'd lost Mercedes to you. They then inherited the Ford, and by the end of their first year with Ford as the works engine, 2-year deal, they were informed that Jackie Stewart was coming in with the Formula One team and had got a 5-year deal for the works Ford. So I always thought Sauber started off, acknowledging the Piranha Club existed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got the engine, and it's obviously been, one of the engines to have, apart from Honda coming in now. And we did very well with the engine.
Well, it started a glorious time for the team, didn't it?
Yeah, and Maro Ilion and God rest him, Paul Morgan. The team there at Ilmor, they produced some great stuff. Some of their engines were completely crazy, 21,000 engines, but only for half the race. And that was the year '95 when Mika had his massive accident in Australia and fractured his skull, and Sid saved him there.
Yeah.
And, I've never seen a driver come back from an accident like that. But Mika came back and he was a champion again. And I was amazed at that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he didn't lose an inch of speed, did he?
No. And so that year I just got in my notes, we had Renault, we had Ilmor Mercedes, Peugeot, Ferrari, Mugen, Hart, Yamaha. So many engines. Yeah.
Well, I think the manufacturers were in love with Formula One at the time, weren't they? The old adage of, win on Sunday, sell on Monday, they must have believed that was...
Right.
Because we'd just come out of an economic recession. The early 90s was difficult times. And we said earlier, teams like Lotus, Brabham, Tyrrell in this decade all disappeared.
Yes.
So many of the minnows disappeared. It was difficult time to
sad. Yeah. And when you think that Tyrrell innovated the female moulded carbon chassis.
Mm.
They innovated the high front chassis and the dihedral wings, and and these teams are gone. But, so we want to move through the years, do we, Steve? We did 95. Yeah.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah, we're doing. We're trundling along now. So
trundling along.
Well,
sorry about
I like that. 1996, obviously, in this country was a year of celebration for Damon Hill finally winning the World Championship, and Michael Schumacher going to Ferrari for $25 million, I believe, a year. Was unheard of back there. And 2 months before he signed, I think one of the Agnelli family came out in the Italian press saying 25 million for Schumacher. That's crazy. No one can afford that. And he did the deal.
Yeah. In your book, you made mention that Tom Walkinshaw said a championship is done by bringing everyone together in the 1 year. Engine, chassis designers, drivers, managers, all in 1 year. And really, that when Michael went to Ferrari, he took Ross Brawn, Rory Byrne, and that's what it's about, really. It's getting the whole combination together.
Well, Rory Byrne was meant to be retiring and moving to Thailand, I believe.
Yes.
School. And somehow, Ross Brawn ends up at Ferrari. So he then persuades the designer from Tolman and Benetton that he really doesn't want to retire and he wants to come to Ferrari. And that partnership went on for so many years and, launched the dominating era in the early 2000s for Ferrari.
Yes, and Jean Todt, of course.
Yeah, Jean Todt, the key organizer, the one
Yeah, and Nigel Stepney was chief mechanic.
Yeah,
God bless him. Whatever happened there, Ferrari Gate. What a mess.
No. But key in that team, we're stepping forward, but it did start in 1996. Michael Schumacher, love him or hate him, and he's a Marmite driver in many ways, but he was unbelievable at getting a team around him.
Sure.
Making people work, because they loved him. Apparently he'd play football with the mechanics. They had on midweek they'd have to finish, whatever they were doing in Maranello on time because Michael was going to. And he knew all of the names. He was ahead of his time in many ways as a racing driver.
Yeah. So Damon, a great championship. And
you can't think of Damon winning the World Championship without remembering the great Murray Walker.
When he said, "I'm in tears." Yeah.
I have to stop now. I've got a lump in my throat.
And Damon could have won it the year before in Australia, but for Michael's rather
in '94.
Yeah, great as he was, Michael made some rash moves on Damon, on Villeneuve, and bad boys sometimes, but a great guy.
Parking it at when
did you see that? Well, watching at Monaco.
Yeah, when he just parked it so Alonso couldn't get on pole. And, he was put to the back of the grid, and quite rightly. But anyway. You mentioned Jacques Villeneuve, because that's obviously 1997. Villeneuve came in 96 as Damon's teammate Williams. He had just won the Indy 500. He won the IndyCar Championship. Brash kid. He put it on pole for the first race, his debut, which is almost unheard of. I think Andretti are the only others. And he would have won that race, but for running wide and being told to slow down. He then wins the championship in his second year, having been driven off the road by Michael Schumacher. And Williams lose Renault engines because Renault are pulling out, and he doesn't win another Grand Prix. And in a way, he's not given his place in motor racing history, because his first 2 years were just unbelievable.
You're right. Yeah.
It's odd. He took on Michael Schumacher and he did win.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
And actually, I just want to flip back to 93 when we had Michael Andretti in our car. Michael never got. I have to say, in fairness to Michael, he never got a fair crack of the whip. We had no testing. We were renting engines from Cosworth. And I think if he'd have had more time in the car, he would have also done well. Anyway, that's
remember who's on the other side of the garage. It was Ayrton Senna. So he's being compared to Ayrton Senna. You know?
Well, yeah, but he had good qualifying times, but he had lots of accidents. He just needed more time in the car, I think.
The ironic thing is his last race for McLaren was the Italian Grand Prix, and he finished third. His best result.
Yeah, that's right. I read that in your book. Yeah. 97 brake steer. Talk about brake steer. McLaren.
Well, I'd like you to tell me exactly how it worked, but basically, I was working for F1 Racing and Autosport at the time, and one of the chief photographer of F1 Racing and the editor, Matt Bishop, who ironically then worked for McLaren later.
Yes.
They saw photographs of the McLaren and they were just going, why? Correct me when I'm wrong here, Neil. This is from memory.
Yeah.
Why is the rear
inside wheel glowing red hot?
Why is it red hot on that side but not on this side? And so it worked out that something funny was going on, and that the belief was that there was basically applying the pressure when you're going around a corner on extra pedal that put pressure into the inside wheel, and depending which circuit you went to,
you switched it with a switch on the dash.
So basically, it helped the car in the corners, and they worked this out. None of us at Haymarket knew this scoop was about to happen, and they basically went, well, when a McLaren retires out on the track, Darren, I will ring you from home, Matt said, and you go and photograph inside the cockpit.
Is that right?
Yeah. So McLaren then either Mick or David retired.
That's correct.
And
there was the shot. So what it does,
took it.
It's like a tank, and like a tank when you brake each wheel. So it brakes the inside wheel.
Yeah.
It helps turn the car in, but what it does, it's a form of traction control. Okay. So instead of going in the corner and the inside wheel trying to wheel spin, it stops it. It puts the drive on the outside, and it worked. And the drivers didn't take long to get used to it, and you switched it from corner to corner, not circuit to circuit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So and the drivers got the hang of that.
But this is a typical bit of Formula One, because it was really clever. It was within the rules.
Yeah.
I remember seeing a photograph of Darren Heath, the photographer, being interviewed by
Darren Heath. That was the guy. Yeah.
But there was a photograph at the next race of Ron in the middle of the paddock berating him. Anyway, it was a typical bit of clever Formula One technology. But at the beginning of the next season, suddenly it was protested, and it was.
Yes.
But I'm glad to say, because that's 1998, it didn't make any difference. McLaren actually steamrolled the championship.
Well, we had Bridgestone tyres.
Yes, that helped.
But going on from that, when it was banned, we developed a system, which will be in my book, but we developed a system inside the gearbox that mimicked that.
Okay.
And the FIA couldn't ban it, and Martin Whitmarsh and the FIA agreed a deal to release traction control thereafter. And that's when traction control was opened up.
Came back in. Yeah.
Technology,
Brilliant.
you know, when you've got 120 designers, trying to find loopholes, that's when the technology races away.
You can't unlearn something you know.
Right. And I mean, going on from that, the problem for Formula One now is that the technology is so advanced, the vehicles are so advanced that the costs are just driving the thing sky high, you know.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for Formula One. I don't know how they're going to slow it down.
Yeah.
I thought, going on from that, I thought Ross Brawn was going to get into Formula One and really reduce the costs. And I don't see many areas he has, but here's a case in question. Bottas, Monaco Grand Prix, right? What happened to the wheel nut? Right, the poor old mechanic, the car stopped slightly out of position, he went on with an angle and it stripped the splines off the nut. Right. We make thousands of nuts for these races. The cost of the wheel guns and the nuts. Right, Ross was going to introduce steel wheel nuts, which is no downside for Formula One, but that was a case that it bit them, and the poor guy,
Oh, I felt for them.
I felt for him, and it wasn't the wheel jammed on. It was that the instant he spun the nut, it wasn't engaged with the spline, and it just stripped the registers off the nut, and the poor guy,
So was that because it was not straight on?
Well, he either had the gun spinning too fast before he went on, or it was at an angle. But Total Wolves has come out and said, the mechanic, it was at an angle and the nut strip.
Right.
But what a shame to the guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
God, I felt for him.
So, gentlemen, we're up to 98, 99.
Yeah.
Well,
98. Yeah.
99. I always think 99 is the championship that no one wanted to win. Michael crashes and breaks his leg.
Yeah.
Mika Häkkinen made too many errors.
Yeah.
You even had Heinz-Harald Frentzen won a couple of races in the Jordan, and going into the Nürburgring late in the season, you were thinking Jordan are going to win the World Championship. His engine blew during that race. I think his engine blown, but he retired, and that put pay to that. David Coulthard at that race slid wide when he could have won, and that would have taken him to within a couple of points of the lead. Mika came back at the end. Eddie Irvine was challenging him because of Schumacher being injured for Ferrari. And Mika did win it at the last race. But I just felt that it was just this thing.
At least it went down to the wire. I was at the Big Apple in Woking with all the McLaren guys and nearly having a heart attack until Michael... did Michael go? No, it was the year before he went out. But anyway.
Yeah.
What was clever there was Michael came back and he secured the Constructors' Championship for Ferrari, and he didn't impede Irvine, but he was there just picking up,
Yeah.
Clever guy.
Yeah.
Michael was clever. Yeah. It was a close year. Close championship.
But if you look through this year, most, there were a lot of championship finales. Controversial ones in 94 and 97. Hill in 96 won it at the last race. Villeneuve 97. Yeah. And both of his were at the last race in Japan. So
1990 Senna.
1990 was. So it was.
We want the championships to go down to the wire, really, don't we?
We do. It was a decade of cliffhangers.
Right. So this year, it's going to be interesting.
Well, I hope it does. We have more. We have more hope after the weekend. But I have to say, just about this year, how good is Lewis Hamilton? Mm-hmm. What an unbelievable racing driver!
Well, he is, and he did have a bit of a spat at Monaco when things went wrong. But
he wasn't very happy. I wouldn't want to be his race engineer, but
no.
Anyway.
And I felt for Leclerc, they made a mistake there. They should have, easy to say, it was a drive shaft failure. They obviously didn't check that out, but I felt sorry for him. But Ferrari, they've come back, haven't they? Well, they came back.
Yeah, so we'll have to see if that's, the whole year. Just to bring it back to McLaren, Lando Norris is doing a great job.
Yeah.
It's great.
Daniel's a bit lost at the moment. I don't know why. Lando keeps saying, well, he'll get the hang of the car, but I like him. He's a great guy. But I hope he comes back. Yeah, we got the Mercedes engine. We should be up with Mercedes. We're supposed to have the same engine, but do we? I don't know. But here's the irony, isn't it? We got rid of the Honda, and it was certainly 2 years of shame for us. But here they are now, fully developed, and they're going to go out of it at the end of this year, and they've really made their mark again. Haven't they?
They have. No, it's true. Amazing. But you just don't see the crystal ball.
Yeah, I'm pleased for them.
We've reached the end of the of the era. I've got one question that's come up. Let me just read this. It says, were there potential world champions in that decade that didn't win, similar to Moss, who was classified as best driver, but never to win the championship in your mind?
Neil, do you want to first?
In that period?
What I would say, Moss was, an exceptional racing driver. A lot of people put him at the top of the list. So, but in his era, winning the world championship was not wasn't everything in the world. There were some great racing drivers. Gerhard Berger, but
Berger should have won a championship, and Coulthard, more importantly, Coulthard should have won a championship.
Yeah.
But, he was paired with a better driver, and also we let him down. We let him down in a few races. He also slipped up, made mistakes in a few races. But I'd like to see Coulthard win the championship. Yeah.
He could have won in 99. He could have won in 2000, couldn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So who else in the last Bottas? I'd like to see Bottas do it, really. But is he going to do it? But in that era, Alesi, Berger.
Well, Jean Alesi, he was, the hottest property when he was at Tyrrell.
Yeah.
And in 1990, he, I believe, had a Tyrrell contract. He then signed for Williams. And then he signed for Ferrari because they came calling. So he basically signed for 3 teams at once. And I've always wondered, he ended up at Ferrari, but what would have happened if he was at Williams? Because Williams were the best team
at the time,
best technology, 91 through to 93.
It's all about right place, right time.
Yeah.
Johnny Herbert,
Yeah, I'm going to see if Tim back in the studio has got any questions lined up for people who want to come on and ask.
Okay.
Tim, have you got anyone that's queuing up?
Right, last one was from David, who says, could you say a little about Eddie Jordan arriving on the grid? For me, the Jordan 191 was the prettiest Formula One car.
191 was one of the prettiest cars of all time, and Eddie Jordan did an unbelievable job as a Formula 3000 owner to basically get Ford engines when other established teams were thinking they would get them. He got sponsorship from 7-Up, Coca-Cola, basically.
Yeah.
And did an amazing job. And basically, when Bertrand Gachot, one of his drivers, went to jail because he had an altercation with a London taxi driver.
Yeah.
And so for the Belgian Grand Prix, Mercedes placed Michael Schumacher in there, who's a sports car driver, and he qualified 7th for the Belgian Grand Prix, caused a sensation, and it was thought that he had signed for Jordan, but by the Italian Grand Prix, Benetton had muscled in and signed him on a long-term contract, and
there you go.
On his way.
I think that's one time Eddie was outmaneuvered, because Eddie was pretty smart. But if you read his book, he got outmaneuvered there. But that's it. The Piranha Club.
Yeah.
I've got another question, gentlemen, from Anne Holden again. Your tip for 2021 champion, Max, Lewis, Valtteri, or Lando?
Wow.
That is a real question.
Yeah. I should say Lando, but if I was a betting man, I'd say Max.
Well, I'll be contrary then, and I'll say Lewis.
Really?
I think the general belief is the Red Bull is the better car than Mercedes this year.
Yeah.
But I just see Lewis being on an exceptional level at the moment. I really hope Lando wins a race this year.
Oh, so do I.
Can I just throw a question? Indeed. Can I just throw a question in there? As far as the Red Bull's concerned, and this flexible wing, what's that about?
Is it Red Bull that are being accused of having the flexible wing?
Their rear wing. They're being accused of their rear wing. And I thought Sky did a very good bit of television where it was showing the wing going down a straight and then going around a corner, and it just goes up by a few centimetres. But Red Bull have countered by saying that the Mercedes front wing is flexing. So
they're all going to flex, and they had this test on the front wings and the rear wings. The FIA have a test of flex, and obviously they're meeting that test.
I believe at the next race they're making the test more difficult. I was going to say more rigorous. That'd be wrong.
Well, yeah.
But basically, you want to have as little drag as possible going down the straight, and you want as much downforce going around the corners. So getting to. There was one period in the 90s where there were a lot of rear wing failures in testing. I think Johnny had a big accident, and that again was exactly what they're doing now, trying to make the wings, less draggy on the straight.
Yeah. Look, they're all trying.
Gentlemen,
go, Steve, go.
All trying to do something different. Just go back to Tim. Have we got any more in the queue for any?
Yeah, I've got Cliff waiting in the wings. He should be able to speak. If you go ahead, Cliff.
Good evening, gentlemen. Neil, can you elaborate on the fuel that was being used at the time? Because I remember one interview with Ron Dennis, and I suspect he stole the fuel from somewhere and said, "I'll do whatever it takes to win." And I think some of the fuels were quite an interesting mix at the time.
So the fuel is, so which period are we talking about, sir?
I would have thought the very early 90s.
I guess it wasn't as controlled then. Now you have to produce the DNA every race for the fuel, and supposedly all the fuel manufacturers are meeting that DNA. It was probably a bit more open then. Over the years, the fuel companies all tried to develop fuels that give it a little bit of an advantage. I'm sure that Mobil gave us a fuel that was good. Ferrari with their airship had good fuel. Were we cheating? I don't think it was as controlled then. It's absolutely controlled now, the DNA. I know that at one of the races a few years back, we had a slight mix from our testing on the race fuel, and it showed up on the DNA, and it was a bit marginal. We had to put the case forward that it was a mistake. But back then, I'm sure everyone was trying to do a bit special on the fuel. In fact, Peter alluded to that in his book about ELF fuel being a bit special. With the
ELF I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Cliff. Tim, anyone else?
We've got a couple in the Q&A again. Laura Ayre says, what impact did grooved tyres and shortened wheelbases have on the performance of the cars in 98 to 99? And how did the engineers overcome this?
Okay, I can answer a little bit on that. Yeah, the grooved tyres. So for the first year, I think they introduced 3 grooves, then the year after 4 grooves. Basically, it was to try and reduce lower the speeds and reduce the grip level. But now you can see that Pirelli, with their tyre technology, can make a tyre with the grip that whatever they need. So it was a bit of a fudge effort to slow the cars down. Wheelbase, all the cars are different wheelbase. In fact, the current Mercedes is far longer than anyone else. That's about just how you set the car up and how you do your weight distribution.
Another one, Tim?
Yeah, this is one. It actually came in very early on, this one. It's a question to Neil, a little bit off subject. What's your favourite McLaren road car? And do you have one?
Yes, I do. My favourite McLaren road car is the Gordon Murray F1 3-seater. probably the best sports car in the world, road sports car.
It is iconic.
Yeah, absolutely. No gizmos, no power steering, no ABS. It's a race car on the road. Beautiful car. Yeah.
And it's a road car that won Le Mans.
Yeah,
Yes.
indeed.
Special.
Indeed. Tim, any more? I'm conscious of the time.
No, looks like we're empty all round now, Steve.
Fantastic. Okay. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for this evening. Just brilliant conversation. Hope the audience have enjoyed it as much as I have. Of just listening to you two guys, I could listen all evening. So thank you, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much, Steve.
I'm sure you're going to do well. Come back and see us again. And obviously, as Neil has said, come back and see us at the museum just as soon as you can.
Thank you very much.
Peter,
Thank you.
been a pleasure. Good luck with the book. And
thanks very much,
Neil. A lot of ground. We needed 2 hours.
Definitely. Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Support Brooklands.